Welcome to session 9 of our series. The earth cries out. One of the steps humanity needs to take if we're going to move toward wisdom is to admit that the world as we've structured it is failing. In fact, it's dying. Whether the current pandemic is a sign of that fact or as a result of it might be subject for discussion, but it's certainly part of it. Creation seems to be doing what Paul describes in Romans 8:22. The entire creation is groaning. It's worth mentioning that Paul isn't saying anything new. The idea is deeply rooted in his Jewish tradition. Isaiah 42:14, for example, says, "For a long time I have held my peace. I have kept still and restrained myself. But now I will cry out." Throughout Israel's history, there are stories of the earth crying out in matters of justice. Genesis tells the story of Cain and Abel, two brothers. Cain was an arable farmer. Abel kept flocks. Each brother brought an offering to God at the right time. Abel brought the best of what he had. Cain just brought something. God accepted Abel's offering, but rejected Cain's. Cain was angry and murdered his brother. When God asked Cain where his brother was, Abel claimed not to know. "Am I my brother's keeper?" he said. Recently, when a prominent public figure called for compassion for the poor and corporate action to alleviate suffering in sub-Saharan Africa, Yemen and elsewhere, one response was, "Am I my brother's keeper?" It's worth remembering that those words were spoken first by the murderer of his brother. One principle in the recovery from the effects of this pandemic must be that we are each other's keepers. My main point here, though, is that in this story, the ground cries out to God for justice on behalf of Abel, the murdered brother. Again, in the story of Job, when Job challenges God and asks why he's going through so much suffering, he asks God, "Has my land cried out against me?" in acknowledgement that the earth can and does cry out for justice. Let's go back to those verses I read from Romans and Isaiah at the beginning. In Romans 8 verse 22, Paul is specific about creation's groaning. The entire creation is groaning in labour pains, he says. Similarly, Isaiah says, "For a long time I have held my peace. I've kept still and restrained myself. Now I will cry out like a woman in labour. I will gasp and pant." The groaning is not the end. It's not where we will stay. It's a precursor of something new. It has a purpose. The Bible knows nothing of purposeless groaning, only groaning with a future. Even in our secular age, I believe that there is, somewhere in the human heart, a flickering flame of hope that it's difficult to extinguish. Even in a world without God, hope quivers against the blackest of despair. So first the groaning, yes. First the labour. We have to groan. The right response to the current pandemic is lament. We have to groan at what the virus has shown us, our exploitation of the earth, our unjust systems that mean the poor and the weak always suffer more. This groaning, though, might be the labour pains that bring forth new life. If we seek to follow Jesus, we must ask God to recruit us into God's labour for bringing forth a new creation, one where the earth no longer needs to cry out for justice, because justice can be seen throughout creation.